Thanks everyone for joining our event today, where we're going to be making sense of public engagement with climate-friendly diets and sustainable food choices. So, as many of you will be aware, the food we eat and the wider food sector is a crucial piece of the puzzle when it comes to tackling climate change. The Committee on Climate Change has included diet change as an important part of their pathway to net zero, and lots of reviews, like the National Food Strategy, have highlighted the need for changes in the UK's food culture. So choices such as eating less and better meat and dairy are some of the impactful actions that households can take and at the personal level. While other diet-related choices like opting for local produce or reducing food waste can make an important contribution too, alongside wider policy changes. And those policy changes must be accepted by members of the public. So with all of this in mind, what is that public appetite for change in 2025 when it comes to sustainable food and climate in the context of climate change? What is the current sentiment in the UK? And what is that public acceptance when it comes to some of those wider policy changes that might support a reduction in food-related emissions across the sector? So loads to dive into today, but just before we get into these questions, time for a few introductions. So Ed, if you don't mind stopping the screen share for a moment. So I'm Niall McLaughlin from Climate Barometer. At Climate Barometer, we make sense of what people think about climate change. We pull together opinion insights and resources on a range of different climate topics, from net zero to renewable energy to behaviour change and more. We're a small team, but just a quick shout out to my colleagues Nadia, Ed, Susie and Louisa, and until recently Adam Corner. So Climate Barometer wouldn't be what it is without all these wonderful people, and it's very much a team effort. I'm really pleased to be co-hosting today's event with the Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations. So we've been working together to bring you today's event on food and diet, as well as a new resource on this topic. So I'm just going to pass over to Bella from CAST to quickly introduce what they do.
Thanks, Niall. Hi, everyone. I'm Bella, and I'm from CAST, and we're a research centre made up of 4 universities and 1 charity, and we research the crucial role that people play in solving climate change. So we have expertise in things like environmental psychology, behaviour change, communications, public engagement, policy, and as well as conducting research, we also work really closely with policymakers and business people and third sector organisations to make sure that our insights are helping to bring about real change. And we are also joined today by Christina, who is the Deputy Director of CAST, and you will hear from her a little bit later on.
Perfect. Thank you, Bella. And yeah, we're really excited to have an amazing panel joining us today who will be bringing some different perspectives to the table of public engagement with food and diet choices. So a little bit later, we're going to be hearing from Sandra Boglin. Probably pronounced your last name incorrectly, but I give it a go. Sandra is the People and Net Zero lead at the Climate Change Committee, and we'll be talking about some of the public insights related to the carbon budget that was recently published, and some insights from the citizens panel, as well as some of those wider measures that can help to drive down food-related emissions in the coming years. We're also going to be hearing from Mia Hartwell, who is the head of food at Hubbub. So Mia will be talking about some fascinating insights from Hubbub's work on food and their research with communities in the UK, as well as some brand new insights, I believe, about the role of gender when it comes to sustainable food. And we'll be hearing from Andrew Stark from the Eating Better Alliance. So Andrew is a senior researcher and policy manager at Eating Better, and he's going to be talking to you about diet-related narratives and creating political space for sustainable diet change and the role that citizens can play as well. So really exciting mix of perspectives. As we're going through today's event, if you do have a question that you would like to put to one of our 3 panelists, please use the Q&A tab. That's a slightly different tab, I believe, to the chat. So there should be an option to click Q&A and type in a question there, and we'll get to those a bit later on in the event. And as I mentioned at the start, if you weren't here, please feel free to use the chat, not the Q&A, but the chat, to introduce yourself and where you're from. So just before we hear from the panel, we wanted to set the scene a little bit and touch on some of the key themes and some of the high-level polling when it comes to the public opinion side of things, just to really kind of open up the discussion points today, and also to let you know about a new resource that we hope will be of interest and will be useful to everyone who's joining today. So many of the insights about diet and food, like lots of climate opinion data, are quite scattered and fragmented. There can be across different places and different organizations. And it can be quite hard to stay on top of them or to know, what the latest polling data is and what that public sentiment is. So we're really excited to be launching a new resource today, which is a collaboration between Climate Barometer and CAST. And this tells the data story of public opinion insights on the topic of climate-friendly diets and food. So I'm just going to quickly screen share to give you a sneak preview of what that looks like. Hopefully you can all see this now. Just adjust things a little bit. So what we're launching today is a new topic thread on the Climate Barometer website. There'll be a link to this being put in the chat. And these are interactive timelines that bring together key UK opinion insights, in this case on the topic of food and diet from recent years. So it's packed full of excuse the pun, but easily digestible insights from the past 5 years of opinion data. And it includes some of the wider context and policy insights as well to help you make sense of the story and see how that evolves as well. There's also a new commentary piece that sums up some of the key takeaways from the thread, including those kind of need to know insights on diet and food. So to help set the scene, we're just going to also give you a little bit of a snapshot and a spotlight on some of the insights that feature on the thread. Given it's collaborative with CAST, we're going to hear a little bit about the CAST data that features in this new resource. So I'm going to pass over to Bella now to talk through some of those insights from the CAST data portal.
Perfect, thank you. If we could hop to the next slide, that would be great. So a lot of CAST's insights in the thread are based on our data portal, which is a survey that we ran every year from 2020 to 2023 across 4 countries. And it gathers public opinion data on climate issues. And it's also an interactive dashboard on our website. So you can go on there and sort of play around with the different topics and filter information by age and gender and that sort of thing. And this slide shows the responses when we asked British people which dietary changes they intended to make to fight climate change. And if we average out the responses over the 4 years, we can see that the most popular change was planning meals to reduce food waste. Around 75–80% of people said that they were going to do that. Buying locally produced food and eating fewer calories were also acceptable to people. And around 43% of respondents were willing to eat less meat, but that willingness did drop when participants were asked specifically about eating a vegetarian diet or eating a vegan diet. And in terms of societal level initiatives, around that same number, around 40% of respondents supported making vegetarian and vegan options mandatory in restaurants and canteens. And then if we jump to the next slide, you can see what this data looked like over time. So we can see that people's responses were fairly stable. There was a gradual increase in intention to reduce food waste and buy locally produced food, potentially reflecting sort of more campaigning going on around these issues in that time. But just an important caveat to point out is that this data reflects behavioural intentions, so what people say they're going to do, which we know isn't exactly the same as people's actual behaviour. And then another interesting insight, if we can move to the next slide, is about willingness to reduce meat intake and how that varies with gender. And we can see from the data that women were more willing than men to reduce their meat intake. And that trend was the same in response to vegetarian diets and vegan diets. And this sort of fits with wider polling and wider research that shows that women are more likely than men to hold pro-environmental attitudes and engage in pro-environmental behaviour. The data portal did show, however, that gender differences are not as noticeable for other forms of diet choice. So buying locally produced food, for example, and reducing food waste. And I think we're going to hear a little bit more about gender from our panel later on. Some other sort of topics that CAST data relates to in the thread include what sort of language and messaging is effective in encouraging people to eat less meat, what governments should do to encourage sustainable diets, and how effective people think reducing meat consumption is in fighting climate change. So yeah, that's a little snapshot of what CAST data is in the thread, and I will pass back to Niall.
Thanks, Bella. And yeah, so comparing the insights from the CAST data portal against some of the Climate Barometer data that we've collected in recent years is quite interesting. So this chart shows self-reported climate actions, and we're seeing a bit of a similar pattern to the CAST data as well. So this is from two waves of polling with over 2,000 people in 2023. And yeah, fairly substantial numbers say they are already buying locally and reducing their food waste. And just under a quarter or up to a quarter say that they are already consciously reducing meat and dairy. But at the same time, there's lower numbers who have adopted vegan or vegetarian diets. But what's quite interesting here, comparing to that CAST data, is that it seems to suggest there's a bit of a gap between the willingness, as shown in Bella's data then, on the one hand, and then the actual actions that people are reporting to have carried out. So the percentages are a bit lower in our data here. And it's obviously with a caveat that this is self-reported, so it could also be a little bit lower still in reality. And that's where I think this new thread resource is really helpful because it tells the data story and provides some of that further context and narrative to help make sense of some of these insights. What seems clear looking across that thread is there is a quite a strong foundation of willingness towards sustainable, healthy food choices, at least in some of those forms that we referred to, with some changes underway. But also we need to bear in mind that there's a lot of influences that play a role with how people engage with food, whether that's gender, as Bella referred to, whether it's the physical spaces and places we make food decisions, whether it's the day-to-day realities that people face in the midst of a cost of living crisis, or even people's worldviews. So that's quite a nice place to leave it and segue into the panelist contributions, because we're going to be hearing a mix of different perspectives from Sandra, Mia, and Andrew. And they'll be touching on some of these themes and influences that can act as, barriers or enablers when it comes to diet change and public engagement in this space. So I'm just going to quickly turn that off. So we can't cover everything today, of course, because it's such a huge topic when you get into the nitty-gritty of the food sector. We will have a bit of an emphasis on the public side, the public engagement and opinion side, but we also do hope to touch on some of those wider related issues along the way as well, from that perspective of public opinion. So I'm going to pass over to the panelists now. The way that this will work is that each panelist will have around 5 minutes to share their perspective and insights on the topic of food and diet. Then there'll be a few questions from us as hosts, and then there will be time where Christina will be coordinating the audience Q&A. So just another reminder that you can use the Q&A box or tab, should I say, which is different to the chat. as just another reminder, to put your questions to the panel. So please do use that as you're listening to the panelists, and we'll hope to get through some of those towards the end of the session. So I'm going to start by handing over to Sandra now. So over to you, Sandra.
Thanks so much. Yeah, hi, and thanks so much for joining. I'm Sandra. I work for the Climate Change Committee, and we've just published the seventh carbon budget, which is kind of our whole economy pathway to net zero. So we look at all the sectors, and amongst that, the agriculture sector, which is where our dietary changes sit. So in the seventh carbon budget, we recommend a 35% reduction in meat consumption by 2050 and a 20% reduction in dairy consumption. And we have a slightly steep, in the meat section, we have a slightly steeper reduction for beef and lamb because it's just higher in emissions and there's a higher health benefit to reducing red meat consumptions. And I think just to preempt a little bit that I'll be talking about the citizens panel a bit as well, but when we talk to people about this, it was quite a reassuring that we're not asking everyone to go vegan or vegetarian. And that was something that sort of broke down barriers already at the beginning, that people understood that we only require a sort of percentage reduction in meat and dairy consumption. And the reason we talk about meat and dairy consumption in the CCC, because we are emission focused, it's not for diet change's sake on its own, it's because we need to, the aim of it is that reduced demand will reduce UK livestock numbers, and that has an emission reduction effect by, first of all, reducing emissions from livestock directly, so for example, methane, but then secondly, it's got an effect because we can free up land that kind of beef and the cattle is grazing on, and also free up land where we normally have to grow food for cattle. So it frees up land that we can then plant trees on, which kind of sucks carbon out of the atmosphere. So it's got that double effect in emission reductions. So this time we assessed what a feasible reduction in meat and dairy consumption is within our pathways slightly differently. So we did a little bit of a bottom-up analysis. Because we advise government, we need to be very confident that when we say, you have to, or in our pathways, we require a reduction in meat and dairy consumption, that there are actually levers that government can pull. So to assess the level of meat and dairy reduction in meat and dairy consumption, we looked at existing trends and historic trends. And then on top of that, we looked at the kind of levers that are available to government to achieve this. So what can government do to kind of enable us as consumers to buy less meat and dairy? So we looked at things like product and choice environments, so like your classic nudging in supermarkets through increased availability or different promotions. We looked at things like reformulation and changes in portion sizes. What's the potential effect of information campaigns and normalization, for example, through public procurement? We looked at relative pricing, and we looked at the opportunities around developments in alternative proteins, so the kind of novel technologies like precision fermentation or cell cultivation. And then based on that, we sort of looked at what's the potential reduction that we can achieve through that that is feasible, but also to an extent acceptable. And then we also kind of looked at, where will that likely push consumption? So for us, we don't have a pure reduction. We replace meat and dairy products with something else. So a small percentage of that replacement we think will come from plant whole foods, because things like information about the health impact of reducing red meat consumption may push consumption towards plant whole foods. But then a lot of the replacement we think will be in existing alternative proteins. So for example, your kind of beef mince replaced with plant alternative mince, your beef burger replaced with a plant burger, those kind of things. And then there is a small role in our models for more novel alternative proteins, but because they're not yet on the market in the UK and we require scaling up for that to really make an impact, that's kind of towards the latter years of the transition. We then looked at the impact on health and nutrition of that mix. So again, we're not having the purest mix into whole plant foods, where you get like the biggest health and nutrition positive impact. But even with our mix, we assess that there will be a positive health impact from a reduction in red meat consumption around reducing cancer risk and risk for cardiovascular diseases, and then a positive nutrition impact, because on average, even if you replace processed meat with kind of processed plant-based food, you get a positive nutrition impact. We also assessed what the impact will be on household food costs, and we assessed that by 2050, the kind of mix of replacement that we have will ever so slightly reduce household food costs in total. But it's also probably good to mention that that meat and dairy currently only make up a small percentage of household food costs, and obviously there's lots of other things that impact household food costs as well. And then we talked to citizens about it. So we ran a citizens panel, and what we didn't talk to them about, what do you think, should it be 35% meat reduction, should it be more or less? We said this is what we require in our pathway. Now let's talk about what policies you could get behind to achieve this. We generally found that people were very willing to reduce meat and dairy consumption, especially once they learned why. I think there's still little understanding of the connection between meat and dairy emissions and then climate change. So that also kind of feeds into that people really wanted more information. So they thought if everyone had this aha moment, then, surely people would reduce their meat and dairy consumption. So they wanted things like labeling, information campaigns like the 5 a day, all of that. They definitely wanted alternatives to be cheaper. So we learned a little bit about the price premium of current plant-based alternatives. So they wanted government to support alternatives being made cheaper. They were supportive of nudge changes to supermarkets and promotion, and also actually quite supportive of reducing portion sizes and reformulation, as long as you don't do that in the restaurant, because that was seen as a bit of a treat to go out and eat a steak in a restaurant. And they were quite queasy around novel alternative proteins, so your precision fermentation, things like that, but were supportive of government investing in that, because they could see that really, if we want to make that transition, the alternatives need to be there, something that people can easily switch to, and that is tasty and has maybe for some people a similar taste and texture to meat and dairy needs to be there. That's me, my hopefully within 5 minute summary. Happy to talk about any of this in more detail.
That's perfect. Thanks so much, Sandra. Okay, so we're going to hand over to Mia next. So yeah, over to you, Mia.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. I'm Mia and I work at an environmental charity called Hubbub. And we do a combination of campaigns and also work on the ground with communities to help people take action that's good for them and also good for the environment as well. And food, sustainable diets, more climate-friendly food practices is a huge amount of the work that we do. We've been focusing on it for a long time, both at a campaign level and also within communities. And this whole narrative around the need for us to reduce meat and dairy and also reducing food waste as another key lever to help us hit our net zero commitments is something we've really been focusing on. So I'm going to share with you some of the outcomes that we've had recently from 2 studies that we've done. The first one is a report called Home Advantage, which you can find on the Hubbub website, where we talked to 175 households from across the UK in depth about the behaviour changes they were willing to make when it came to meeting our net zero commitments. Now, obviously, food came up as a big part of this. And the key things that we took out from that, and relating to what Sandra was just saying about people being willing to make changes, is that people are willing to make those changes, but you need to A, frame it positively. So we can't be diving into vegan or vegetarianism. That really taps into a sense of identity. And I'm sure we've all felt that if you've had a diet chat around the kitchen table with family members. It's not about going vegan. It's not about going veggie. And it's not even about switching or swapping. It's about helping people try small incremental steps that are framed in a way that benefits them. So it's things like adding things into your diet or trying different things, maybe focusing on more fruit and veg rather than talking about less meat and dairy. So it's all about that positive framing, making it something that's appealing to people. So bringing to life the health benefits, as well as potentially the money saving benefits when you start to look at a steak versus a tin of beans, for example. But that positive framing is something that we all need to do to help make this behavior more acceptable for people as a whole. The next thing was around trust and trusted messengers. So who is delivering that message is incredibly important. So we found with the Home Advantage study that people started to open up and were very interested in other participants' opinions. And that's because they'd started to become part of their community. There was an element of trust there that was building, and people were more likely to take on board recommendations from others that they'd had contact with. So at Hubbub, we do a lot in the community with our community fridge network, which hopefully some of you have come across because there are 700 of them around the UK. And these are all geared around reducing food waste, but many of them do cooking classes or activities that are actively about engaging people in the community around food, learning skills around how to cook from scratch, how to cook efficiently, but also how to cook more fruit and veg rich dishes, reduce your meat in a community setting. And we consistently get incredible feedback from those sessions where it's not only about people learning skills and understanding how to cook more plant-rich foods, because there is a gap there we've identified as well. A lot of people don't necessarily know how to make dishes that lead with plants rather than your standard meat and two veg, very British. So by bringing people together in community settings, giving them that education in terms of actual cooking skills, but building that sense of trust and social endorsement and community, you're showing that these behaviours aren't something for veggies and vegans over there. It's actually something all of us can do and that people like me from my local area are doing too. So it makes those behaviours sticky. The final thing, though, is it's all very well thinking about the macro level changes that we can make in terms of framing it in certain ways, trusted messengers, but we do need to break it down by individual audiences as well. So launching next month, coming up very soon, we are launching a report that has been diving into the behaviours of one segment of society, which is young men and their meat eating behaviour. So this is men aged 16 to 24, and we've discovered that this audience in particular are eating meat much more regularly than anyone else, which has quite concerning implications in the long term from an environmental perspective, but also a health perspective as well. And when you dive into this audience, what you can see is their sense of community is very different. So young men have had some formative years within the COVID pandemic. We were just talking about how that was 5 years ago, the panelists before this session. And if you've grown up during the pandemic, your community is very much online. Your trusted messengers are very much online. They are influencers. They are people that you're talking to on Reddit in different places. They're not people in 3D around you. So in terms of influencing that particular audience, we need to take very different action versus what you might want to do with a young family who could come along to a cooking class. So that nuance is super important. And we all, whilst we can look at these macro level sentiment changes at a population, when you drill down to different age groups and to different genders, as Bella highlighted earlier, you've actually got some really different drivers that you have to tackle in a different way. And if you'd like to find out more about that, sign up to the Hubbub newsletter. Otherwise, I'll hand over, I think it's to Andrew next.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
over to you, Andrew. Go for it.
Thanks, Nal, and thanks, Mia and Sandra, for the contribution so far, and thanks to Cast and Climate Barometer for the panel. Really excited to be with you today. I'm dialing in from a very sunny Glasgow, so yeah, that always lifts the spirits. And thanks also for the chat. There's loads of links and resources that I've been having a quick flick through, and I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions. So I'm going to share a few slides just to set the scene a little bit. I'll get rid of myself. Can people see them? If someone could just say yes, that would be.
Yeah, that's all good.
Brilliant. Thanks, Niall. So thanks very much. I'm the Senior Research and Policy Manager at Eating Better. And for those of you that haven't heard of us before, we're an alliance of 70 organisations from across civil society. This includes farmers, animal welfare charities, community groups, researchers, Hubbub, in fact. So a real broad range of views across food. And we work across 5 key food system areas. And these are governments, producers, food service, retail and manufacturers, and finally, financial institutions and investors. And you can read more about the sorts of changes we want to see across food and particularly in diets on our website. And some of the key focus areas for us at the moment are around political narratives, industrial livestock production, and food justice. So in a nutshell, what we're aiming for is more fruits and vegetables, more beans, lentils, whole plant proteins and plant-forward alternatives, better meat and dairy, but also less meat and dairy. And I'm stealing this phrase I saw in a panel recently, a better mix of foods. And I think that's when we're talking about framing and not either or options, as Mia sort of said there. I think a better mix of foods is a really friendly way of framing what we're aiming for. So our focus is on policy, and I wanted to sort of, or in this session, I wanted to sort of focus a little bit on policy, and the need to get on the front foot and the sort of positive role that policy can play. So I think when it comes to modelling the future and the changes that we need to see in the diets and the sorts of foods we eat, this change is going to happen whether we like it or not. Climate risks of food production mean that certain crops will be less likely to be able to be produced in the future, and also harder to import and export. With an increasing poverty gap as well, we're limiting the options that are available to people, and with health risks associated from a lack of fruit and veg consumption, we're seeing that diets are changing. So whether we like it or not, this change is happening. And I guess the question for us always is how we get on the front foot. And I believe with government policy, this can be a key mechanism to set regulations for industry, which they are calling for, to support farmers in this transition to what this future that Mia and Sandra have been speaking about, and also to increase the amount of food options that are available for people so that they're able to integrate a better mix of foods within their diet that are more healthier and sustainable. And there is a positive story to be told for dietary change, and there's lots of opportunities ahead this year, particularly the National Food Strategy, which we're hoping the UK government will be publishing some details of very soon. And we often hear, but we don't want to tell people what to eat, you know? People are just trying to get by, they're just trying to get on with their lives, and they don't want a quote unquote nanny state to be telling them. But I would push back on that and say that the food system and the places that we interact with that, and in policy terms and sort of research world, this is called the food environment. This already does shape what we eat. And this graph on the right, or this map here on the right, sorry, of England shows lobbying by fast food outlets across England and planning decisions that were approved or disapproved. And as you can see, the majority, I think around 10 there, were won by, I think it was McDonald's in that instance. So these are decisions that are being made that do shape the environments in which we are eating the food that is good or not for the planet. And I would say at the moment, generally the food environment is not healthy or sustainable. So I would ask, what would it look like if the opposite was true? What if we were to flip that nanny state argument on its head and create a food environment that supported healthy and sustainable diets? And building off of the kind of research that the CCC have done, as Sandra said, and Mia have done through the community work, this isn't as divisive as it might seem. And we at Eating Better have been doing public attitudes pollings for many years. And we can see here that a majority of people are willing to cut down their meat consumption, in our findings. Around a quarter have. And animal welfare, carbon emissions, and money are the top 3 motivators for people to do so. So a few thoughts to leave you with as I sort of wrap up in this very quick summary is, how can we better involve the people that we're talking about in the decision-making processes on food? What would it look like if we flipped the nanny state argument on its head and really interrogated that counter-argument? And finally, how can we broaden the conversation on dietary change and increase the political pressure on the decision makers, those with the power to implement the policies that can make food environments healthier and sustainable for people, so we can see an increase in healthy and sustainable food options. And that's my email address. Any questions, thoughts, or challenges, please do reach out. Otherwise, look forward to chatting further. Thanks now.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. That was really fascinating and really a nice mix of different perspectives from that public engagement side and the opinion through to the policy side. So thank you so much for that so far. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A. I can see there's already quite a few coming in there already. Just before we get to that, I'm just going to ask the panelists a couple of questions, and then we'll go to the audience Q&A. So the first one that I wanted to ask, and this will be one that I think will be nice to pitch to each of the panelists, is when it comes to barriers to engaging with meat and dairy reduction or adopting a better mix of food, as we just heard about. I want to get your sense of where you feel the near-term priorities really are over the next year or so. So what else is needed? What are some of those major changes or concerns that people have, and what do you really see as being some of those immediate priorities? I think some of that's come up in your presentations already. But yeah, I might hand over to Sandra first, because there might be something from the citizens panel that you could speak to this issue around, barriers and concerns.
Yeah, I have to be careful not to talk for half an hour about this now. But so I think to start with, we're on a real mission in the CCCM, because we've got this wider emissions focus, to be very clear about what the most impactful choices are that people can make in terms of emission and climate change, and the kind of shifting to lower carbon foods is one of them. So I think that if everyone would pull that string, if government would actually honestly talk to us about, that this is something we require, at least in our pathways, we require that, I think that would help. But obviously that's, the emission perspective is not the only one around engaging. I think so from my perspective, when we looked at the levers, there are really levers that government can tap into that sort of push an already existing trend. Like Andrew said, we also see that in the FFS data and consumption data as well, that people are reducing their meat and dairy consumption. So there is an opportunity to say, okay, how can I support people in making these decisions? And they're kind of the softer policies that really, if I was a policymaker, I would probably look at now before you might need to look at the kind of maybe the things that are a little bit more difficult in the later years. And then for us, I have to say, when we talk to people in the policy space, a real game changer was to talk about, in a similar way to how we talk about other low carbon technologies, what can we shift to? And that's also something that was, talking to policymakers, but then also sort of talking to people. It's not so much about reducing, it's not a sacrifice thing. We're just shifting it to something that is better for everyone, that's got like these win-win-wins. So it's not a sacrifice. It's really, we can shift towards tasty and healthier and better for the climate options. I think when we communicate with the public, we really found that there is a big concern about farmers' livelihoods. And I guess that's something that if you want to communicate with the public, you need to say, what are you doing to help farmers diversify? Say there are options. Government is helping farmers. This is not to destroy livelihoods of something that we value.
Fantastic, thanks. And yeah, Mia, over to you on the same question.
Yeah, so I think the priorities going forward is all of us on this call will be talking about this all the time. It is very top of mind for us. But for the average person, each of our neighbours, this is going to be so far down the bottom of the pile, particularly when it's a very uncertain economic climate out there right now. There are so many other challenges going on. So I think a crucial thing that we all need to do going forward is just keep banging the drum in terms of consistent small reminders that, in a positive way, again, that eating more veg is actually going to make you more resilient. It's going to make you healthier. It's going to make your family healthier. It's going to save you money. But keep banging on at it, because there's so, at a time which is probably very, very fearful, we need to make sure those positive messages are cutting through. So it's not just about how it's going to badly impact farmers, or it's how it's going to take away your sausages or something like that. All of the negativity, we've got to keep that small positive drumbeat going and keep it in people's minds so that they remember when they go to the supermarket, oh, actually, I might try this, or I might add in a little bit of that. It's just making sure that we get cut through, because this, whilst it's a priority for us, and it should be a national priority, given food is something we all rely on and would like to continue eating into the future, it's just not on people's priority lists. So how do we keep banging that drum between us to make sure that people are getting positive messages again and again and again, so that it does cut through in their brains as such?
Yeah, and then over to you, Andrew, as well. I guess you might be able to speak a little bit to the policy barriers maybe as well, and what you sort of see from your perspective across kind of an alliance of different organisations and trying to drive that change.
Yeah, thanks, Niall. And yeah, just on that alliance perspective, I'm really lucky to be working at an organisation where we have such diverse views, and that really does inform the many different angles to consider when we're developing the work streams that I spoke about just then. Yeah, I guess, yeah, a big barrier is as you sort of said there, and as I said in my slides, is a real big policy gap. Really, there's not the policies that we need to join the dots on all of this, and at the moment, the market is dictating a lot of the trends and pressures that both people are feeling, as Mia said, but also the price that farmers are receiving for their produce, etc. And I would say one kind of sort of more thematic barrier I'm picking up recently is the lack of space and time to really consider and think through, because I think everyone is under such immense pressure, whether that's in the household to get by at a policy level to deliver in very tight financial times, farmers to have the headspace to think through changes that might be needed as part of a transition. So I would say, but that is where dietary change and looking more holistically at our food system can really connect these dots and create more of a level playing field and create more buy-in rather than everyone working extremely hard in their own little siloed area. And I think that will bring more of the public involved, because it will start to connect the dots in a way that I don't feel they are currently connected.
Fantastic, thank you. I was going to ask some more questions, but I can see that there's loads coming through on the chat, and I'm really keen that we have some time for the audience to sort of engage as well. So we'll pass over now to Christina to provide a couple of brief reflections, I think, initially, just really quickly, and then, yeah, take the audience Q&A.
Great, thank you, Niall. I'm going to keep my reflections short, I think, partly because the questions are exploding, which is great to see. I'm not sure we're going to get through them all, so do have a look through and follow up if you like. I think I was just going to say that Climate Barometer threats are really, really useful because they bring together different data sources and evidence to kind of tell a bit of a story, which from a kind of social science perspective, I think is really great, because actually there is messaging around public perspectives, where they're at or how it's kind of evolving. And it's quite similar across all the different reports that are coming out. So it kind of creates some sort of certainty that we kind of know where people are at, and actually tells a relatively positive story. So in that sense, I think that's kind of my overall evaluation of what the threat is doing. And I like that it's bringing together different data sources to kind of corroborate what we know, and the kind of the diversity in kind of different types of data sources. I mean, it's focused on polling, but also the panel speakers have talked about, you know, what they're finding out sort of on the ground and from different organizations. So that's great.
So just to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're going to wrap up now. Massive thanks to our panelists, Andrew, Mia, and Sandra. Thanks to everyone from CAST who's helped to put together the thread and the event, especially Bella for her input on the thread. And thanks to Ed and Nadia for helping with the tech side today. Do let us know what you thought about this event. We'll be sending out some feedback form, I believe, and we'll also be sending out a recording from this. Do sign up to the Climate Barometer newsletter, shameless plug. Check out everyone else's organizations and newsletters. I'm sure they will be really grateful if you sign up to their organization newsletters as well. So that's all from us. Thanks everyone for joining today.
Thanks everyone.